right. So welcome everyone. My name is Un Lee. I'm the executive director of the Dream Unfinished. For those who are not familiar, the Dream Unfinished is an activist orchestra. We use classical music as a vehicle to engage audiences in dialogues around social and racial justice. And we have certainly been doing that in the concert hall for a number of years, but partially from obvious COVID restrictions and partially because we really want to be where the people are. We have been embarking on this web series and trying to use this platform as another space where we can be having these dialogues around current issues and how they play out in classical music. So I'm joined by our master production manager, Sarah Overton. I think we can go ahead and just kind of dive in. And the issue that we want to raise to kind of pick up from a couple episodes back where we were talking around health disparity outcomes. So I believe it was in our episode 3, we were focusing on the real sort of unfortunate differences in maternal and infant mortality for Black families. And today we'll be talking around Native American health disparities specific to coronavirus. So I'm going to just do a quick screen share. And to first point to a WebMD article that's quite recent from last month. And so as we all know, coronavirus has had a really devastating impact on communities all over, but particularly communities of color. And as this WebMD article points out, particularly then in Native American communities. So just to give a sense of the sort of scope of these statistics. So 1 in every 475 Native Americans has died from COVID. And as there's been much made in reporting, Black Americans have been disproportionately impacted, but that's even worse than the Black American population. For Black Americans, it's 1 in every 645. For Pacific Islanders, it's 665. Latinos, 835. White Americans, 825. Asian Americans, 1,320. And I'm also props to WebMD for disaggregating Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans. I sort of wonder why we're all lumped together. But particularly in an instance like this, where actually, Asian Americans are double of what it is for Pacific Islanders. But in any event, what we're talking about in today's episode is Native Americans. And I mean, this is just a devastating statistic. Like, if you're thinking about, because I think part of the scary thing with numbers is that statistics often make things so abstract, particularly when the numbers get really big. But you can imagine 475 people in front of you, and then imagining 1 out of every 475, and then imagining the multiples thereof. Like this is something that you can picture in your mind's eye, which I think is, so much speaks to the sheer volume at how this is taking place. Sarah, I don't know if you have any reactions that you want to jump in with.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, in our first episode on health disparities for Black families, we talked a little bit about the social determinants of health, just access to quality education, to quality healthcare. And we know that for Native American communities, these social determinants are so often, I think they're difficult to, it's difficult for Native American communities to have access, to those same, the care that they deserve. So I know that plays such a big role in this, and it's so evident in this really unfortunate death rate.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think that points to how really, COVID, if anything, in some odd way, has been a symptom rather than a cause of things, right? Like, as you were saying, because of, what we could kind of more sort of, in a macro sense, think of the pre-existing conditions in which, there has been this kind of devastation. So this is from the National Congress of American Indians, and these are some stats around their demographics. And so and I remember actually reading this and also just being kind of surprised at the numbers that, it does go into the fact that there are like 5 million people who identify as either American Indians or Alaska Natives. And those are only of the voting age population. So even just getting a sense of the breadth and scope of Native American presence, I found very educational. But then with that, yes, so these health disparities. So even before things like COVID entered our lives, Native Americans, American Indians, Alaska Natives, they had a lower life expectancy by 5.5 years. They have higher rates of heart disease, of diabetes, of chronic liver disease and cirrhosis. Also self-harm and suicide, which I think points to like mental health issues and probably, a lack of resources in that sense. And so there's this is actually quite comprehensive in terms of giving like a overall picture, but I found that some of these statistics were also very telling, that 4 in 5 American Indian or Alaska Native women will experience violence in their lifetime. That the rate of assault or homicide is more than double the rate for the country as a whole. So again, that unfortunately, as this article is pointing out, not only has COVID been so terrible, and in recent months, apparently it's been even getting worse, but I remember once actually saying, hearing a quote from a journalist, or maybe it was a health official, something like, COVID is a virus that it like preys upon these existing inequities, and it like for populations who are already vulnerable, it in that sense, like the virus has eyes. I think that's the way that they were talking about it. And so with that, just wanting folks to be aware of the exact sort of scope of this, and how pervasive it is, and then also letting folks be aware that, as we try to always point out with our Instruments for Change section, that there are other organizations that they can be looking into that are really trying to address these kinds of issues. One of the ones that we could find is the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board. A little bit of a mouthful, but it looks like they're actually doing quite a bit of work around public health and safety, particularly for Native American communities. They actually have a very active Facebook page, as I was able to visit. They're doing a ton of virtual and Zoom outreach, and seem to be very connected with their communities. And then also there's the National Council of Urban Indian Health, because I think, unfortunately, people have a very sort of broad kind of stereotype or understanding of Native Americans on Indian County or in Indian reservations and things like that. One of course, as these numbers from the National Council indicate, like they're all over the country, including in cities. And so there is this organization that's dedicated specifically towards those Native American populations that find themselves in more urban or metropolitan communities. So, again, this is really tremendous work that needs to be undertaken, but we have organizations like these that are at the forefront for really advocating for these kinds of topics and issues. And then also there is, of course, recent news with Deb Holland. For folks who are not aware, Deb Holland is the first Indigenous Interior Secretary, and she, and she had already been a real sort of trailblazer in being one of the first of, I believe, 2 Indigenous Congress people and to be recently appointed. And I think it's very interesting too, not only in terms of the fact that she's a pioneer by her identity, but also because she's been such a strong advocate for environmental issues. And so with that, and particularly with the duties around being the Secretary of the Interior, not only for those who are keeping an eye on environmental issues, but then part of her sort of jurisdiction or oversight is around what what is experienced by different Native American populations all across the country. But I think her appointment really points to the fact that, again, that this population is here, they're present, and by having her in such a powerful and prominent position, that that can just underscore the fact that this is really a segment of the United States that needs to be much more amplified in terms of like how we are making policy decisions, and what it is that we're doing for communities of color on a broader scale.
Yeah, and what's so wonderful about this? I think she talked about in this article, or there was a quote that I saw about H.H. Stewart, who was long time ago, I think it was 1800s, was a former Secretary of the Interior, who made it his mission to either exterminate or upend tribal people and tribal lands, Native American lands, and now with Deb Holland sitting in the same seat, her vow is really to reverse all of that damage done, and make a lot of progress. And I think it's just so important in terms of reclaiming stories and reclaiming history that for so long has been just totally morphed, to a larger narrative, and to have, real people of Native American ancestry, Native American heritage, tell their own stories and shape their own futures, and be in positions of power like this is really wonderful.
But I think we're going to close it here. So just really wanting to thank you, Sarah, for joining me, and thanks to folks who are tuning in. And we will be back with more episodes, I think with a slightly different lineup next week too, in terms of hosts. But again, the same topics of classical music, different sorts of social issues, and how those two may intersect. And we look forward to having you tune in and join us then.
All right. Thank you again, everyone.